Okay, 1 sec. Sorry, I'm trying to do it LinkedIn. I hadn't granted the permission, so I'll just do it on Facebook. I've got to remove the LinkedIn. Or I'll just see if I can get the permission quickly if it's a click. No. No. Application. Sorry, I'll remove it. Remove. Okay. We're live. So today I'll be speaking with Greg Dodge. Greg's currently CEO of his creative business, Oxygen42. He's been developing and inspiring the local Queensland music industry for some 4 decades now, and it's been an adventure. Greg was the first president and co-founder of Q Music, convinced the state government to build and invest in the very first TAFE college in Australia to train popular music industry people. Greg's been a mentor for many of today's local music leaders, and whilst developing his own music business, Music Works, Kinetic, Oxygen42, Dandelion Gifts, alongside creating many social, recreational and development music programs across the state and nationally. Greg's currently active in intercultural development and is event manager for a new upcoming community-run festival, Congo Flavour, and is developing a leading and new intercultural creative project coming together. Greg lives in Brisbane with his wife Jules and is passionate about building intercultural communities and is exploring developing men's circles and a melting pot circle for everyone. Greg summed up by his life passion for community building, conscious connection and creativity. So welcome, Greg. I gave a bit of an intro, meaty one there. So it's been quite, I think your life, it's been quite a journey to date. So what I'd like to know is, in that journey, what are some of the major triggers or pivot points, the things that have changed direction or opened up different opportunities to you, and what's driven you in that?
Yes, thanks, Dave. I think when you're young and you learn to be a manager, after working in sales when I was very young, after playing in bands and actually getting into a corporate gig, something occurred in my makeup, which I think happens to everyone, and now I call it an entrepreneurial seizure. An entrepreneurial seizure is this madness that goes on after you've read some books by Richard Branson and, Dale Carnegie, and you think, look, you know what, why can't I do this too? Why shouldn't I be able to start a business or do something rather than just working for someone else? So I think the trigger point for me was I wanted to be my own man. Even though it wasn't the right choice at the right time, when I first started my first business in 1989, because my wife and I were having our 3rd baby that year that I was, and I had 2 young children already then. And I didn't tell my wife that I'd actually wanted to start a new business. And I did start the new business, and my former boss heard about it and he sacked me because I was going to basically create a competition for him. I came home and said, Jules, I've lost my job. She said, what? I said, I know, but I'm starting a new business. You what?
She found out that was why you lost your job.
Yeah. I know, it's crazy. But anyway, that was an incredible journey. And that really, I have no regrets, even though we lost a house and we lost a unit that we'd been building up, as young family. My wife stuck by me and it took us 4 years to recover from that. But I learned so much, and it enabled me to grow, to go and help other people. And I wanted to sort of acknowledge to the world that, I wasn't a waste of breath. In that time when I had my business, I had started Q Music, as you mentioned, lobbied the government with the TAFE to develop the first music industry college in Queensland. Today, there's 10 colleges and universities around popular music. Back then there was none. So that was 1992. I still keep in touch with those first students, the 30 students that started that first year. I'm still in touch with them. I was talking to one last night on Facebook, bizarre.
I think such an important thing, one, to have started such an endeavour and pushing with the government, but to maintain relationships from that, because I think I can only imagine that back then that's something that opened up opportunity and gave these, they may have been young people, some time ago now, that chance to learn and have education around such a thing like popular music. And I think in the music industry, when you're outside popular music, and you know a lot more about this than I do, that it's I get a sense that popular music isn't popular outside of popular music.
Well, that's right. There's actually a few different streams. I mean, there's a jazz stream, very strong jazz community. There's a very strong blues community. There's a very strong classical community. And the classical world has been existing for, hundreds of years. And of course, they created the infrastructure around education. So a lot of education prior to popular music coming along, there was only very limited even jazz courses 30 years ago. There was a jazz course in Sydney, and that splintered into a university at Lismore, where they brought some really modern jazz players out of a band called Crossfire out of Sydney, and they led the first popular music university in Australia, and we learnt off them. They started probably late or mid-1980s. We started 92. So we learnt as a TAFE college in Queensland, not delivering, bachelors of music. We were delivering Cert 3s and Cert 4 in popular music and music management and sound performance and all those things you need within the industry, all the skills you need to have good sound equipment or good recording, good live music.
That's an interesting thing you said there, because it's recognised it is an industry, but at the same time, music is something, and I know that you work a lot more in this now, in the area of different cultures and multicultural sort of ventures, and music is such a powerful influencer and voice of culture, but
Totally.
but at the same time, it's an industry as well. So
yeah, I think a lot of people, it's a very small industry, even though when you're in it, you think you're in a very big bubble. Everyone in it, it's quite a strong competitive industry. And of course, everyone grows up with some music as a bit of a soundtrack to their life. I think people forget that music, unless you're a really hard sports fan, you may only have a little bit of remote understanding of music, or love of some of the bands or some of the music or some of the artists that come out of it. But I think for all of us, as we grow up, and I think I learned that everyone, when they're 12 to about 20, and maybe a little bit longer, whatever occurs in your teen years, music tends to be your identifier. You'll attach yourself to some genre, whether it's punk music, today it's hip hop and rap, for the young people, or it could be, emo. But all of these little groups create who you want to be seen to with your friends, who you want people to see you as a rebellious. Those genres make a statement on your behalf of what you feel you want to be known as in that world. So we learned a lot about human behavior through observing these different bubbles within the music genres, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I'm thinking back for myself at that time, and I think when you're going through, basically going into puberty and those transformative years into adulthood, there's such emotional times, and you're learning about yourself and understanding things. And yeah, I've got a lot of, to me, they're very personal and odd kind of memories around music and what I'd listen to, and I think that every single thing from that age, in those teenage years, I think everything I enjoyed and liked then, it brings back some memory now and something I enjoy or like or connect with. And I can't remember music much before I was 12. I suppose from my family and parents, certainly influenced from that. But that certainly carried on throughout the teenage years and into now. In fact, even last night, listening to some of the old things, bringing up some old Meatloaf tracks and things like that with Dad. So it's
what I discovered, Dave. In 2001, we'd heard about a music program in America called Weekend Warriors. Now, in the 90s, with my own business ending in 95, I was heavily invested in the music industry that was the recording industry and the songwriting and what I call the intellectual property, where people create new music. It's all about new music. It's not necessarily about playing other people's music. But then in the 2000s, I heard about this program in America coming out of Sacramento. And what they'd done, they targeted 40-year-olds to 60-year-olds. And in 2000, if you go back, that was the baby boomers at that time. They were born in 1946 up to 1962. There was a 18-year window that they called all these different generational shifts, the 18-year shift. Before the baby boomers was the builders generation, baby boomers, Gen X, Gen Y, now millennium. And so what I did, I was a young baby boomer at the time. I think I was about 42. But I thought, I know so many old blokes that would love to play in a band because their history was in the 60s and 70s in Australia, music, if you weren't into sport, music was the only other thing you could do. You'd go out to pubs, you'd go and see live bands. So there was a very strong live music presence. So what I did was I was tapped into these people that had given up playing when they were 17 because mum and dad said, go and get a degree, go and get a real job, cut your hair, go, there's no money in music, which is right. But, all these people were lawyers and doctors and teachers and electricians and just ordinary everyday people. And we put them into bands. So they'd come in individually. And then for 4 weeks, we would train them 2 hours a week. They'd be with this little group. And we'd have 5 of these. So 5 bands performing half an hour each. You would have a 2.5, 3 hour concert. We used to put them on at the Kedron Wavell RSL on a Saturday night. And we used to get 500 people turn up to see these completely amateur bands that had been rehearsing for 4 or 5 weeks. And I got to tell you, that's when I saw how they had zipped back to their teenage years. And you were talking about 40 or 50 or 60-year-old men that thought they were in Led Zeppelin, or they thought they were back in AC/DC. It was just amazing transformation.
Certainly, a lot of fun. And one thing I like about that is the bringing people together and bringing them together after so much time and different backgrounds. So how did something like that work with the different interests and styles? Did people form their own groups, or you sort of facilitated a bit of that?
So we facilitated that. We had a coach and myself and an administration person, and we worked through Eloise Music, who were at Kedron. So I was the marketing manager, and I thought this is a great way to sell equipment. Well, guess what? It certainly did that because these guys had a full-time job, and if there was a $5,000 Fender guitar or a Gibson guitar or a Paul Reed Smith, these are like the Ferraris, they would buy it. But they wouldn't stop at one. I had many mates that, bought 30 guitars off it. So otherwise they benefit. But there was another side to it that I got excited about, and that was the social and emotional well-being of the individuals that participated. And that really took me into a whole new area of community that I'd never really been engaged in. I was always in the business, how do we sell more stuff? And the Brisbane City Council tracked me down and asked me if I would be interested in setting up a music program for people in suburbs on the outer fringes like Alcester and Wynnum and Zilmia, where they had their own research showed that there were 50-year-old middle-aged white men who were basically high levels of suicide and mental health because the family had up and left them and they were basically had nothing to do. And so they thought music would be a good engager. And so we started that program called Come Together. And then from that, they asked if I could do a youth program in a school working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders and Polynesians. And we did that at Glenala State High School, 8-week program where the kids would write their own song and do a couple of cover songs and then perform in a hip-hop Indigenous festival, which was at Inala. So you can imagine that got me sort of into the community, which I never really had any interest in. And then I moved down to Logan with some work, and I ended up doing a whole lot of community engagement in Logan around 2006, 2007, 8, 9, 10. We created an activity called Dream It Up, which was a unique partnership between the Logan City Council, the Logan Chamber of Commerce, the Logan PCYC, Eloise, Multilink, and a whole group of different people. But it was about empowering young people at school, young year and 8, 9 high schools. So there were 16 high schools at the time, and we brought them all in for a one-day adventure to help them dream what their future could be, to know there are.
So that wasn't around music, that one, was it?
No, we had musicians and dancers and performers, little short bites of them, but there was keynote speakers every time. We had different people who could talk about their own life. They'd faced adversity and had won through, you know.
Yeah, that's it's interesting. There's so many different tools that we've got available to bring people together, to share, and something like music's one great one, and anything I think creative, positive, productive, and sharing that we're not all the same. And I think something like that is a great opportunity where people can express themselves and release energy and share a lot. So, so what?
It's complicated to get a group of 4 or 5 people together. You know, you think about bands get together, but that's a little family that forms. And, you'll have different personalities that don't necessarily get along. The beauty of our programs, they were 5 weeks long, which meant if they didn't get on, the band would explode anyway at the end of the program, unless they chose to go on and, continue the band. Some of the bands did work and continue today. Some of them would find other members from other bands and they would form a new band. So we created a community, and they self-organized themselves into their own Warriors Association run by a dentist and a pool manager, swimming pool manager. And they had 300 members. In 2 years, they had this massive club, and they were putting on gigs everywhere. It was quite amazing.
Well, one thing that's so brilliant about it is that when you've got, even up to 300, but a number of people, it's so much harder if a band, if you're talking, here's 4 people, create something, and everyone's so different. But if you've got such a big pool to draw on, then people can pair up and do different things. And I think I saw a documentary quite a while ago, Paul Simon, when he did the work in Africa, Graceland. Yeah. And it seemed like most of that album was almost accidental. It was a bit of jamming and figuring it out and playing around. And that's a lot of the work I love of him.
So through the learning of, as I said, we started with the council with white men, right? And the problem was I knew we were in suburbs like Inala where there's a lot of different cultures, and Vilmia. And I went back to the council and said, this Come Together program, why don't we not do like the Beatles and Rolling Stones and Led Zeppelin and all that? Why don't we actually do reggae, R&B, and hip hop? And they said, oh, that's a good idea. And I said, but we'll need to completely change the name. We called it Rhythm City. And we opened it up exactly the same, except we were really encouraging people from different cultures. And we ended up, having Africans and Polynesians and Indigenous, and we put them into bands with white Europeans. And it was just as successful. And they loved it because really, it was a group of us that were there for them to support them. A lot of them have self-confidence issues. A lot of say, oh, I'm not good enough to do this. and we'd build them up. And by the time they got to the concert, they'd invite 10, 15, 20 of their family and friends and workmates. So, you know, you've got 30 people in 5 bands, all bringing 10 to 20 people. It's easy to get a crowd of 300 to 400, 500 people, right? Yeah. So
Yeah.
that was the first insight for me into what you term multicultural, which I now really am passionate about, intercultural. And for the listeners, I've got the definition of that. Because I mean, it took me a while to get my head around it. Multicultural represents refugees and migrants. And then we have Indigenous sitting over here, our First Nations people, in a separate silo, if you like. And migrants operate around services that only deal with settling them into Australia. And they come from over 200 countries in Australia. And then you have people like me and you, the boat people, you know, that came in around somewhere between our ancestors, 1788 and the 1800s. We arrive. So intercultural is bringing those 3 different streams together. Intercultural describes communities in which there is a deep understanding and respect for all cultures. And intercultural communication focuses on the mutual exchange of all the ideas and the cultural norms and the development of deeper relationships. In an intercultural society, no one is left unchanged because everyone learns from one another and we all grow together. So that's what I like about intercultural.
Yeah, I think that's a term I'll have to use a lot more now, because you know I think most of my life has been intercultural, but you know
Exactly.
my
Your family's intercultural.
Yeah, my family is. I've lived in several different countries and non-English speaking countries, and it's one thing I love. You know, people talk about here, even if you don't think about cultural, food's another thing, a bit like music, that people still love it. They'll love whether it's a salsa for music or as simple as a kebab, or you know, having some Asian food or a stir-fried Chinese or whatever it is. I think the world would be so boring and we'd be losing out so much by dismissing other cultures and not embracing and learning and sharing it. There's so much sharing that can happen between people. And
I totally agree.
That's one thing that it has me thinking. I think, what can I do to try and help some of this? And I've always thought, with Mind for Me, and you know how that works with helping people and each other, and it's mostly been around the simple tasks, you know, child minding and little things around the home and garden and that. However, one thing I think people have a lot that they can share and impart is knowledge and learning. And one thing that we want to introduce into it is, and maybe I need a better word for it, almost tutoring or education. And I always thought 2 areas of that, the first 2 that came to my mind, were language and music, say instruments or anything like that, that people can start to connect and engage more in those things. So
I think food, I think food is a very beautiful opener. You know, food is actually, the beauty we have in Australia is that because we've got this diversity already, you know, we have so many different types of foods that we just take for granted now. But if you think 30, 40 years ago, people were really finicky about, you know, Chinese takeaway was as rare as we were going to get, you know. And now there is virtually every type of culture that you can get the finest food here in Australia. You know, and I think this is true of a lot of other countries now too, except a lot of them tend to still stick to their regime, you know, and their favourites, you know. But I think in Australia we're lucky because we can taste food from all around the world right here, and we can get stories. That's the whole thing, deep understanding and rich respect. Firstly and foremost, as you know, what I'm passionate about is our First Nations people. When people get a real sense of that true history, the hidden history, you know, the trauma that our ancestors brought upon them, and how we heal that all together, and how we allow the migrants and the new refugees that have come here, who have also come with trauma, but they too to learn that story so they could also share their stories with our First Nations people. So the First Nations people realised that, hello, around the world, there's been a lot of this trauma going on, and we're not alone to this, you know. And our job is to help heal that.
Yeah, it's funny. It touched on me one thing that we've, you know, so many places around the world do have access to the foods, and we've got a lot of benefit from that, and not shutting off countries. And I lived back from 2007 to 2011 in Poland, and I remember when they got a Chinese takeaway, a small town, West Poland, one Chinese takeaway, and I went in and I thought, I'd been there, I think, a couple of years, and I thought, it'd be really good to, you know, get some stir-fry noodles or something, but they didn't know what noodles were. So I could get beef and black bean with chips.
That's funny. Actually, what's so funny, when you talk to when you talk to Chinese, you know, real genuine Chinese people, we befriended some young ones who had a business in West End. They had a cafe. My wife and I ended up having a business 5 years in Boundary Street, West End, the main street. And we talked to them about Chinese food. You know, we said, we love Chinese food. And they went, the Chinese food you have in Australia is actually westernized. It's not real Chinese food. And that's the funny thing. Each country takes it and sort of makes it a slightly European flavor to it. And so they got their parents who'd come over from China who couldn't speak a word of English, and we couldn't speak a word of Cantonese. And we had dinner with them. And of course, they were our translators, these couple 30-year-olds, and they had handmade a Chinese meal for us. And it was beautiful. It was so good. You can't buy it here, you know?
Yeah.
And we had the most wonderful time.
That's an interesting thing when you see shows like Customs or whatever it is, Border Control or something, and you see a lot of the foreigners bringing food in.
Yeah,
you realise, I realise my partner's Vietnamese, and the Vietnamese that we have over there, very, very different.
Yeah.
And when her parents came over last year, and what we had was, it was different. It wasn't food that we could easily get here. And actually, you mentioned Anala a couple of times, and Anala is about the closest I know in Brisbane that you can get to
real
Vietnamese.
I mean, the culture out there is amazing, that people are frightened. I was originally frightened to go there way back in 2003, you know, when the council got me. And I took my car out there, and, you know, it was a nice car, and I thought it's going to get scratched or someone's just going to be... No, the people were beautiful people, and I've still got relationships with them now. You know, it's funny what happens, you know, when you open your mind and open your heart to everywhere, you know.
I might be wrong, but I imagine most people that have some little story about whether it's a cafe owner or a takeaway shop where they got to know the owner a little bit because it's over the food and what they've received and that they love, and they give the feedback. And
I've got a great story for you around that. So we'd down in Logan, I mean, a lot of people, knowing that I actually live in Brisbane, but I got to know the people in Logan really well, and I love them to death. And I used to go and have lunch once a month with a group of people, elders, there were CEOs. There was about a small number of 6 of us, but we go to this little cafe that was a place called, I think it was Monash or anyway. This gentleman was a Turkish guy. He and his wife had this place, and you'd go there, and it was the most amazing food, and we'd sit there and eat it. And I was telling this lady at Springwood, who was one of the workers with the economic development, and she said, "Oh, you're new to Logan, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Can I give you a hint? Don't ever go to Woodridge. Don't ever go to Woodridge." You know, she said, particularly Blackwood Road, which is where this cafe was, right, at the time. It's gone now. And I said, "Why is that?" She said, "Oh, yeah, you'll get stabbed. You'll get knifed." Now, that was someone telling me. I could walk around that place and smile at people, and they were beautiful people it's like going to New York, you know, and seeing mass different people, you know, human beings.
My brother and I, we were living in London, and we went out to Romford, east of London in Essex. And I remember out there, people had always say similar things.
Yes.
We went out there, we had a ball.
Yes.
We found people friendly. It was a little hard with communicating. We had some cultural differences funnily enough. And we did have a couple of people, or one fella come up and say, "Oh, look, you should be careful around here." But we felt it was warm, comfortable. I think we grew up in Canberra, and
Yes.
I don't think most of Australia knows how Canberra could be. But back in the early 90s, and that, every time I'd go out, I'd see fights and brawls and things. And yeah, well, I don't see it since. Hopefully it's changed, or maybe I just get older and I don't go out to any of those places.
Yes.
But yeah, I think we do, you say, have an open mind and things like that. And people can have a bit of fear. It's natural, but it's such a wonderful thing. And we've had a comment there, diversity brings prosperity. And I think that in my life, if I wasn't open to so much, I'd really be missing out. I'd probably go crazy not wanting to try different things. That's one of my biggest things. When I go to a restaurant, I look for what have I never had? What's something so different, or that I'm unlikely to have next week, or anything like that.
So when back in 2016, my wife and I took 7 months off and went traveling. Which, by the way, we've never done in our entire life, raising 3 children, always been busy. I've only ever had 2 weeks holidays at a time. And we said, look, we need to do this. It took us 2 years to plan it, to get our life in order to be able to do it. But for 4 months, we went to 13 countries. And everyone asks you, which is the most amazing country you had and visited? Well, we had 3. You ready for them? Egypt, Jordan, and Peru. Those 3 were amazing. Now, we did go to Scotland and Europe and Spain, and they are beautiful places too. But those 3 places that are very different to our worlds, very different to our. When you go to Europe, everyone's still white, even though they might have different languages. When you go to Jordan, and you go to a mosque, you go to Egypt and see the ancientness of the whole place. And Peru, well, what can I say? It was just mind-blowing.
And that's what stood out for the 3 for you?
Totally. Yeah, I mean, they were all fantastic. We didn't have a single bad experience in our whole 4 months away. And we backpacked, and we Airbnb'd, and it was quite bizarre. But hopefully we can do it again one day. But even if we can't, it doesn't matter. It was such a beautiful imprint. But you asked me what influenced me. Many years ago, I read a book, and I read many books, but this particular book really got me because it was a poem that was written around the late 1800s, and originally it was actually written by a lady, and it was in a prize from the Lincoln Times to ask everyone what the poem they had to write was. What is success? And I followed this thread and realized that she wrote it. She got the money, but every week, Ralph Waldo Emerson, who's a famous poet, an American poet, he used to write a column. And what happened is he got accredited to this poem. And so he rewrote it slightly. But I always liked the poem. This is his poem, but not the original one. If you read the original one, it's very similar. Her name was Bess Stanley. It's a very short one. And this sort of drives me to laugh often and much, to win the respect of intelligent people and the affection of children, to earn the appreciation of honest critics and endure the betrayal of false friends, to appreciate the beauty, to find the best in others, and to leave the world a bit better, whether by a healthy child or a garden patch or a redeemed social condition, and to know even one life has breathed easier because you have lived. This is to have succeeded. Now, if you think about that statement, and when I read it and I realized there was a backstory to it, there's nothing about money. A lot of people, when they say success, what does success look like? They always think about prosperity and money, but none of that talks about money. It's a fabulous poem. It's called "What is Success?" So you can Google it and find it. And it's a motto that I've lived with,
Oh, for me, yeah, I think that was brilliant. I'm really glad you read that because when I think about it, to me, it's just it's a very raw, honest account of what life should be
Correct.
and what things are. It's I actually just coincidence did an interview this morning, and that was actually around success. And we
Yeah.
talked about money a lot, but most of the talk around money was that money is such a small element of success, and money in itself really only matters as much as what it gets you, what it means, what it enables you to do. And you know,
But,
even when you don't have money, there's so much you can do.
well, this
You
is the
know,
thing, David. I mean, I'm not a, and never have been chasing the money. I mean, to be honest, I lost more money in my life than I've made. But for some reason, I appreciate that, you don't have to chase desires. You don't have to have flash cars. I've just been fortunate to get my wife, I'll be honest, is a good real estate um, finder. She found the home that we currently live in 10 years ago, but it was the worst house in the street. And I knew, because we'd actually bought and sold properties before, that you can get the worst house and it will take you about 2 years and it can look fabulous if you've got a vision for it. And that's much like anything you want to set your mind to in a community. If something isn't right, there is a social condition you want to change, and you focus on it enough, over a period of time, you can play a small part in making that change, and a small part is important too. I always say, as long as when I die that I've made a very small dent in the universe, that's all any of us can really do, unless we're very, very lucky and, we've been a Bill Gates, or we've been a wealthy entrepreneur, an Elon Musk, of that league. But anyone can make a small dent in the universe if we want to.
Absolutely, I agree. It's I think the biggest loss is when we don't take action, when we don't do anything, and we sit back and we let life happen to us. And when you see, say, a new neighbour moves in down the street, and you realise they're from somewhere else, maybe a different background, then
Yes.
that's really such an opportunity. That smallest thing can just be simply going in there and welcoming them to the street, taking
And
them. I think, look, from what we're talking about, a plate of food.
Yeah. Well, actually, it's bizarre that people don't think that exists. I know it exists out there in the community, and I know that my wife and we do that type of thing. Like if the house next door to us, we've been here 11 years now, has changed hands 4 times. But every time a new person goes in there, Julie and I will bake something and we'll go in there. And even now we exchange cakes with the family there. We exchange different things. They mow my front lawn because that's the only lawn I have in the front. I've got a garden. I'm trying to grow a veggie garden patch out the back. So I've got no lawn out the back, which is great. So we try to build relationships with our neighbours by giving them stuff. If we make a batch of something we've got too much, we'll just drop it off to them. They always go, "Oh, you didn't have to do that." And I know we don't, but why not?
Absolutely. To be honest, I don't cook for myself. I cook the minimum for myself when I'm eating. It's the most basic thing: steamed veg,
Yes.
and a piece of meat or something.
Yes.
And the cooking that I enjoy is for other people, and I do like to share that with them. But it's really just, I won't put effort in for myself. I'll put it in for other people.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm thinking, when it brings me to, when we're talking about community and neighbourhoods and things, the work I've been doing with Mine for Me, I'm not sure if you're aware, one thing we're building is offering help. So at the moment it's built around asking for help. But with that offering help, and we've already got in there the idea of exchanging meals, but I'm just seeing such opportunity here to, that we look at how just more ways people can share this. And that, especially if you're doing an interesting dish or a traditional dish or just anything that you love, that one of those old family recipes, it's something you could put out there to offer to a neighbour. So I think that's something, a little message that when we get that new feature built in, we'll put it out there, because really it's about opening up the community, getting people interacting and connecting more and sharing more.
And
And
it's not easy, as you and I've discussed previously. Even though I think the state government's struggling with their own care army, because my wife and I signed up for it, and we're very open to get involved in community. But we found it difficult for people to put themselves forward that they actually want help. So we've been helping Julie's mum and dad, because they're 92 and 83. So we've been doing a lot of work with them to make sure they don't see anyone else. We're the only sort of visitors, because all the families stay away. They don't want to be the one responsible to actually infect them, but we always keep our distance. We don't hug them when we're down there, and that's sad. All that stuff's really sad, You can't connect, because that has a lot of the oxytocin. When you hug someone, it actually gives you a real chemical uplift. It's healthy for you, healthy for both parties,
Yeah, I've seen my aunt recently, and that was an awkward. It was actually awkward not hugging, but I think because of everything that's happening now, at least there was just a small glint of there's a connection there, because we're both realizing we want to hug, but we're going to keep our distance.
Yes.
For the it's the benefit of community and society, and just in case that odd little chance that something could get passed on. But it's it is a hard time right now to share, but there's so much that people can do for each other, even whilst maintaining the distancing. And a lot of people won't use the term social distancing; they'll say physical distancing and things. And I think that's quite important. But it brings me now back in a circle to music. That every day when I do have the TV on, it seems that people around the world are connecting online in using technology a bit like this. And I don't have much of a musical bone in my body, really.
There's a wonderful girl from Beenleigh. Her name's Waverly Yasso. Waverly's a First Nations lady. She's teamed up with another lady, and they created this concept called pub choir. Have you heard of pub choir?
I've heard of it, but I can't think why. Or if I've heard you mention it before, it might be.
Oh, maybe. But look, what blew my mind, I thought, what a great concept. Because to me, singing, everyone has an instrument in their voice, right? And all of us think, oh, we can't sing, and that's all right. But in a choir, you can get lost. And in a large choir, you can get completely lost, which is great. So you can sing your heart out, and no one even can hear whether you're singing in tune or out of tune. So what they do is they've been bringing large crowds of people together, I think up to 1,800 people.
Wow.
And they've been doing it in London, New York. They've been doing it across Australia. This is a girl from Beenleigh, beautiful guitarist. Anyway, because of the whole COVID thing, they've been doing it online. So it means that it doesn't matter where you're from. They've been connecting and doing pub choir singing online. Isn't that amazing? They're bringing people together through singing.
Absolutely. And I think on Friday, hopefully you'll be there. We're going to do at 4 p.m. Just an open chat around the community and things, what we've missed from before the lockdown and COVID-19 measures, and things that we've gained. And I think we've got some really massive gains through connecting, being able to connect a lot closer in a strange way to people further away. And
Dave, I think
you
sent me a beautiful video a couple of weeks ago, and it was called The Realization. What was that called? Something, The Age of Realization?
I'm trying to recall.
Yeah, it was a wonderful. Was that the guy reading a storybook to his son and daughter? Remember that? I think it's The Age of Realization. And I'm hoping that through COVID, we don't go back to the normality, the money-driven capitalistic system. I mean, I'm not trying to say we're trying to create a utopia here either, because that's more complex. But I think that little video says, well, the world was full of a whole lot of busyness, and people were stuck on their phones, and they weren't communicating, and they weren't thinking about community. But, you go back probably before even I was born. I know my family, and probably as I was growing up, I have a remnant of it. They were very community. The community would get together all the time. The families always going to people's places and sharing food, and the kids were playing and all that stuff. It was just common, you know, and they'd share food. Like, we'd grow food, you'd grow food, I'd bring my spinach, you'd give me some tomatoes, you know, and there was all this exchange. And I want that to occur. And Julie and I were just talking about that. We want to build a little veggie patch that's stronger. We've been mucking around with it, but we want to do it so we grow a lot of lettuce, a lot of tomatoes, a lot of beetroot, a lot of ginger. And when we get too much, we go and swap it with someone who's growing pears or apples or, you know.
I'll have to introduce you to Helen and Spare Harvest. So she's up in the Sunshine Coast hinterland, and she's developed a platform around exchanging and sharing these things from the garden. And it's exactly what you're describing there.
Yep, great.
So I think this is, it's right now is such a great time to open up the community and for people, just to, like you said before, it's the smallest little change, the smallest bit of action that can trigger, it can flow on, it can be reciprocated, and next thing you know, people often we always hear and see, unfortunately, a lot of negativity and think of spiraling downwards, and people can, but there's a spiral upwards. That little thing that you do for a neighbor and saying hello turns into another hello, that turns into a how are you, and a conversation, and relationships form, and people learn and they gain, and a lot can happen just from those small things.
I think, Dave, that little word, and I think selfish needs to be turned to selfless, you know, that it focuses on the other person, you know, stop being selfish and self-centered, be there to serve someone else, you know, to be selfless. You know, that little word moving from selfish to selfless, you know, so that you're there to help someone else when they generally need it. And they'll be there when you need it.
Exactly. The more people that can open up just a little bit towards that selfless side when you see someone in need, and that's actually the fundamental core of the value in mind for me, is the cost of giving or doing something for someone else when you can is a lot less effort, a lot less work for you than when you need the help and you're getting the help. And we lose so much by closing ourselves off and sticking to our own homes and our families. And as much as we love and care for them, we're a part of a greater society, and we'll all be so much better off if we just have that element of selfless, because it comes back, and it comes back when we need it.
Absolutely.
And, so we might start to wind it up on that note, and I think on a wonderful positive note. And I really hope that on Friday that we'll see you in there, at least for part of the session and the conversation. It's mostly a giving, everyone.
I'll be there.
It'll be great to see you. Well, thanks for your time today, Greg.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me.
And
thank you so much.
We'll talk soon.
We will. Thanks, David. I appreciate it. Thank you.